I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be day 6 of the 12 Days of Litmus. The 12 Days of Litmus was created by Adrian from Stripped Cover Lit, and I will link to his channel below. The day 6 prompt is to tell your story with literature. And my story with literature, I think, begins with being born into a family that just had a lot of books. My parents had the kind of shelves that would have a very serious geological survey of minerals in the Congo next to Homer's Odyssey, next to some Spanish poetry, next to some Agatha Christie mysteries, next to some science fiction pulp, next to a leather-bound collected edition of Tintin comics. I always had a sense of writing, or the combination of pictures and writing, could do anything and be anything. Because everything was combined like that, I don't think I had the fear of high culture that I think a lot of people will talk about, because I don't think I ever thought that there was a huge difference between reading Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra or the comic book Asterix and Cleopatra, which I think is a good basis. I definitely went through the traditional childhood phases. I know when I was 8 years old, I really liked to read a lot of books about horses and dogs. My very sleepy dog does not care about this. When I was in high school, I went through a phase where I read almost entirely epic fantasy and military memoirs, or lightly novelized memoirs. I think for me, the sort of personal turning point was in my first year of university, but not for the reason it is for a lot of people. I was not a literature or an English or any of that kind of major. I was studying linguistics and computer science, so I wasn't reading books, I was doing problem sets. But I had a massively long commute, not just that year, but obviously for all of the years. And by massively long, I mean an hour and a half each way, often 2 hours during the winter because it was bus, subway, bus. Because I had all that time, just the sheer volume of material that I could get through. I was reading easily 350 books a year because I had so much time to read. And that was also the year, because I had started reading so much in the fall, some friends of mine over Christmas gave me a series of journals and suggested that I keep track of everything that I was reading. So that got me into the habit of writing about what I was reading. Also that year, because I'd been reading so much, that was when my boyfriend, who's now my husband, started giving me award winners. And my mother had a subscription to the Globe and Mail, so I would always read the review section every weekend, which used to be like a full, almost magazine piece. Nowadays it's like a couple of pages in the back of the newspaper, but that was in the late 90s, and that was the same time that the Toronto Public Library put their catalog online. So you get that, go online, pull up your books. I did take one literature course, which was, as a breadth requirement, you had to take one humanities course if you weren't in a humanities field. It was actually pretty wide-ranging, but it was specifically from a Jungian perspective, which I didn't particularly agree with, but I think that was great as a mental exercise, because I disagreed with so many of the points of analysis that I might not have gotten a great mark. That was my lowest mark when I was in first year university, but I think it definitely built up my critical skills somewhat. So I am glad that I took it, even though it doesn't look good on my transcript. I think the other thing that happened that year was, while standing in the queue at the university bookstore, on the magazine shelf they actually had comic book floppies. And I mean, I grew up with the Francophone comics, which are the album style, but I hadn't really read like Anglo-American style comics prior to that, and I picked up one, and it was when Warren Ellis was writing Excalibur. And I was really taken with it, so I ended up getting into Anglophone comics through having picked that up. And I think that really, if you've seen any of my wrap-ups, I read a lot of comics, and I think that was my gateway drug into that world. I often see people make videos about how to read more, and my answer is how to read more is to have a really long transit commute and not be someone who gets car sick. I can't imagine what it would be like if I were someone who had motion sickness, because that commute would have been deadly boring. Anyway, I think those are the basics. I mean, I like to think that my tastes and my critical abilities have matured, because I am talking about something that, you know, over the past 20 years since then. But I definitely think that that one point, where it all comes from. I no longer had that long commute. Well, actually, technically that's not true. For about the 4 years after I finished undergrad, I actually had a commute that was about 2 hours a day. So not quite as long, but still pretty long. So I was still doing a lot of heavy reading then. But as soon as I had a more manageable commute, I was down to a more normal, 30 books or so a year. And it's only the past couple of years when I've had no commute that I've kind of approached the other levels. I don't know if that matters because I'm talking about volume as opposed to anything artistic, but that led me down the path of my current understanding of how one should read and how one compares reading for entertainment and for analysis. And anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.